Hello, my name is Aaron Birkby. Right now, I'm the CEO of Startup Catalyst, which is a not-for-profit that takes Australians over to international markets, particularly startup hotspots like Silicon Valley, into Tel Aviv in Israel, into London in the UK, with the goal of reprogramming their mindset, which sounds a bit bizarre, but basically it's my job to actually reprogram Australians to think more global, to move faster, to operate on a better level of existence, but also to actually have the confidence and skill recognition that they are world-class. They just need to work on something far more aspirational. In addition to that, I also serve on the board of Startup Oz, which is a national body representing the early stage technology companies in Australia. I'm also the co-founder of 3am Founders, which is focused around mental health for entrepreneurs, and also something called Peak Performance Persona, which is really focused on delivering online programs for entrepreneurs and others to have a toolkit of new habits, new routines, techniques that they can call upon at any time to maintain a peak mental mindset. But what I want to share today is actually one of my founder stories. So most of my life has actually been spent as a tech entrepreneur. One of those companies that I actually ran was called Arinda Internet. But we were the back end billing and authentication for any sort of public internet access, whether you were staying in a hotel chain, whether you were staying in here in Australia, for example, a mining camp or remote location, or shopping center or other public space that had Wi-Fi or other types of internet access. We would manage all the back end of that. We ran that business for 9 years. And in that time, we entered into 9 different international markets with about 6 million users annually across about a base of about 220 clients. We did it with a very small team, only 6 staff. But interestingly, during that journey, there are a lot of moments that were incredibly high stress. So we spent a year, so my wife and I were in this business. We spent a year living out of a tiny shed at the back of my mother-in-law's place, of all places. And when you're approaching the age of 30, the idea of living in a shed at the back of your mother-in-law's house and turning 30 there was really disheartening. We also spent a lot of time on the road. So for the better part of that year, we actually were living out of a small station wagon. We had multiple times where we couldn't make payroll. So I remember one Christmas with our staff, the staff were going around the table at our work Christmas party, talking about how awesome the year had been for them. So one of our staff members had just bought a house, put a deposit down their first house. Another was talking about their upcoming international holiday. And my wife and I, we were sitting at opposite ends of the table and we looked at each other and we knew in that year we had personally only taken about $5,000 out of the business. This was during the global financial crisis. It had been a tough year. But we couldn't tell our staff that we didn't know how we were going to make payroll for them in January. And we ended up having to take $150,000 in personal credit card debts to carry payroll for a couple of months and all our inventory and other overheads, just to keep the business kicking. And I remember it was an incredible period of stress and high anxiety. So I would often wake up at 3 a.m. in the morning in panic attacks, convinced that I should just quit what I'm doing and go and get a normal job. And then all the usual things of a technology company. So if you're familiar with technology companies, it's quite easy to actually destroy your database. So we had devices out in the field. We would push out updates and it would basically turn them into bricks, like they were unusable. So we had devices out in hotel chains like the Hilton globally that had to be sent back to us to be reconfigured. And we dealt with a lot of very interesting people, including psychopaths. And if you don't know the actual technical definition of a psychopath, you should look it up because there's a high proportion of psychopaths amongst us in the entrepreneurial world. I think you have to be a bit crazy to actually do this in the first place. So I don't know if we attract them or we breed them, but either way, we meet some very interesting people. But the point is, with all of those stresses, everything I just described, I just consider that normal entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship is really hard. When you are pushing the envelope of something, you're going to have really high stress environments. You're going to suffer from things like impostor syndrome. You have massive self-doubt. You have the weight of the world on your shoulders. Your staff look up to you. And meanwhile, you can't share anything with them about how hard it is. You actually can't talk about, hey, by the way, staff, we don't have enough money to pay you next month. Although in hindsight, I think that would have been a better strategy. But you end up carrying a lot of this burden and stress. But all of that is just normal entrepreneurship. Anyway, in 2012, we sold, and this was the moment, my boy had just been born. We were very keen to get out of the business, and this was our moment of fantastic. So we actually broke the company up into 10 or 12 parts, sold it off over the course of about 18 months, to different buyers, and we thought we were on top of the world. We had enough cash at bank that we could live quite comfortably and not have to work for a period of time. So we did what you naturally do, go and take some time off. We also started a startup incubator to help other technology entrepreneurs, because I was really put out by the lack of support that I had found. I was paying consultants about 120 grand a year to mentor me, which in hindsight is incredibly insane. Why was I doing that? Now you can get access to so many mentors who donate their time for free. They have this give first attitude. So I went out and set up this startup hub to support other early stage technology entrepreneurs. And I did it with a couple of mates. We did it as a not-for-profit. We poured money into it. We did it entirely volunteer-based. No one drew a salary, and we ran that for 3 years. The problem with that is my exits slowly became an incredible pain point. So what should have been a life-changing moment actually ended up being a massive tax liability for me. So over the period of the next couple of years post-exit, I was getting letters from our taxation organisation here in Australia, the Australian Tax Office, basically saying that I owed a lot of tax money. And the way we'd structured the deal, we basically screwed it up. So our exit event became a massive financial stress. And by the end of it, after a couple of years, we realized we were about $500,000 in debt. So what should have been massively life-changing became this massive debt that we were carrying. But at the same time, I'm in the startup ecosystem, you know, mentoring other entrepreneurs, standing up on stages, speaking to a couple of hundred people in an audience about startup life and why you should all be an entrepreneur and listen to me. And meanwhile, I felt like the biggest fraud ever, because here I was, I couldn't even have structured my own exit of my business well enough. I was a complete financial failure. So I suffered massive anxiety at that point. I suffered massive imposter syndrome. But over the course of time, so I had to spin up another startup. Luckily, we got lucky on that and sold it within 9 months. We were able to repay most of the debt. I took a job, and of all places, I took a job inside government, which if you're an entrepreneur, the last place you want to work is inside government. I remember walking in the door on the first day and wanting to quit immediately. In fact, even when I accepted the position, I rang my wife to tell her, look, I've accepted it. They kept upping the offer and I've taken it. It'll get us out of this debt. And she just thought I was joking. It seriously took her 2 weeks before she believed I took a job inside government. And at the same time, we had, the birth of our second child, my beautiful daughter. So I had to hustle hard to build back up our net worth back to just a basic balance of zero. And that's heart-wrenching, particularly when you're out in the startup community, helping others, giving first, and being seen as this example of how to launch a business. Luckily now I've come through that. So I've transitioned out. I no longer feel that way. But again, the point I want to reiterate is even with all of that journey, even with all that hardship, the debt, the audits from the tax office, everything that went on, I still don't consider that a failure. To me, that is not failing. I have a couple of very strict definitions on failure, which will make sense in a moment. But I did fail on something. And I want to share this. It's quite personal, but I think it's really important to convey. And that is, many of us work incredibly hard. We dedicate ourselves to our job. And whether that's as an entrepreneur, and for those of you who are entrepreneurs, you know it is a 24/7 career path. You cannot switch it off. But even if you're in a high executive, you're a high-performing salesperson, you know the pressure to be out. And we all do this believing that in the future we will be successful. In the future, we will have this outcome, whether it's we exit our company, whether it's a sales commission, whatever that is for you, a bonus, we will have that moment. And at that moment, that's when we will be successful. And therefore, we tell ourselves that's when we will have the holidays. And we make all these sacrifices. We sacrifice in the interim time with our family. We sacrifice time with our spouses and partners. We don't go on the holidays because we believe in the future we're going to have this abundance of time and wealth. Now, the problem with that is we grow apart from the very things that we want to keep. So for my wife and I, my wife stayed at home with the kids after our business was sold. She went down that path and she grew in that direction. Meanwhile, I was traveling around the world and I'm growing in this direction. And it meant after about 5 years of that, we actually then realized, wow, we are very different people. We haven't been on this journey together. And I always thought, well, in the future that will be fixed, but the reality is you can't fix it. So the point of what I'm saying here is, you have to take your family on that journey. You have to grow together and you have to include everyone around you. The other part of that is not waiting for the future for that quality time. You have to invest in that time right now, all the time. So I made the mistake believing that in the future I'd have unlimited time, I would be retired at a young age and be able to afford going on holidays all the time with my family. By the time I actually got to that point, I'd sort of lost my family. In fact, my wife and I are in the process of separating right now. You don't have to make that same mistake. But what I really want to get across today is the concept of failure. So all those things I described at the start about having to live in a shed at the back of my mother-in-law's house, having to sleep out of a car for the better part of a year, going massively in debt just to make staff payroll, constantly making mistakes in the business, through to the complete mistake with how we structured our exit and the financial cost of that, the reputational cost of that, the impostor syndrome, all of those things, I don't consider any of them actually failure. And the reason is my definition of failure. So when I think of failure, it's a failure to show up. When you have an idea and you fail to do anything about it, out of vanity or whatever reason, or just a fear of risk, that's failure. When you know what needs to be done, but you don't actually try, that's failure. Failure to me is failing to show up versus just making a mistake. So here in Australia, we have events called fuck up nights, and you stand up and you talk about your mistakes, your fuck ups. That's quite different. You can make a mistake, and as long as you don't embody that mistake, as long as you don't carry it, you separate it from yourself and learn from it, that's incredibly powerful. We can also have times of unpeak where we just don't feel great. Like we just need to recognize that, you know what, some days are tough and we want to sleep in. We don't want to get out of bed, whatever it is. But when you have the right toolkit, you can actually lift yourself up out of those unpeak states and put yourself in a peak state. So for me, it's about hard physical exercise. I use music playlists to put me in a particular state of mind. I choose food to put me into a particular mood. So rather than what do you feel like eating, actually think about what mood do I want to be in, and then use steps, techniques, tactics, habits to engineer you into that state of mind. But that difference is, you can be on peak, you can make mistakes, but failure is not showing up. So when I look back at my history, at this last 6 years of my life, my failure was failure to show up in my relationship. My failure to show up with my wife, to spend quality time with my family, to put myself and my family ahead of my company, ahead of my business, ahead of my day job. Please don't make that mistake. If you actually look at the research, if you put yourself first, if you put your family first, if you prioritize your health, your wellness, your family's health and wellness, quality time with loved ones, you will actually perform better as an entrepreneur. You will actually perform better in your role. In fact, if you actually spend more time out of the business instead of spending 100 hours a week feeling like you're getting all this stuff done, I guarantee if you actually restrict that time, you'll be more productive. You will actually get more done in less time, and it'll be a higher quality output. So put yourself first, and please don't make the same mistake of failing like I did, which is a failure to show up. Anyway, I hope this has been useful. Please, if I can deliver any more value, please reach out to me. If you're interested in our Peak Persona program, please jump on the website, peakpersona.com. And otherwise, good luck with whatever it is that you are doing in your world. And please do reach out if I can be of assistance.